Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. This program emanates from KAZU-FM in Pacific Grove, California. It's broadcast number 680, December the 17th, 1984. We're still having problems with the tower here and the equipment, but everything should be repaired and in working order, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. I want to discuss the problems we've had at KAZU and share those with you. There are 2 weeks remaining in the year of 1984 as of this evening, and I'm thinking very seriously of making some changes in the format or the way I continue to share my research. Last week, I stated quite emphatically that I wasn't going to stop, and I have no intention of stopping the pace that I've been working at, and it seems to be more full every day and even more gratifying to put some of the pieces together every day. But I am going to have to change the format in some ways. Nothing is definite, but I'll keep in touch with you, and I will decide within the next 2 weeks probably. If the changes occur, I will keep the broadcast going until March, maybe tapering off and not taking new requests, but those that have already subscribed up through March. But I begin to get checks to subscribe for the year of 1985, and I don't want to commit myself. I know what I'm going to do. When I started World Watchers, it was at a small station here at KLRB. It was a hobby. I shared the information with listeners, and gradually people learned that we had this broadcast here, and I met people from around the country who started to subscribe. Now I have a problem I have a few problems. One is that the listening audience is still, it's too large now. Well, how can it be too large if you're reaching more people now? You may say, well, isn't that your goal, to reach more people? But here's what is happening. I have this tremendous amount of news coming in. Books, articles, documents, clippings from other papers, the many that I take, a lot of good investigative reporting going on from all over the country and out of the country. There is a lot of information to absorb and learn that I want to do, and learn as much of it as I can. But on the one hand, with all of that piled up, I am inundated with correspondence as a consequence of my being out in the public and doing the work. I get letters requesting the sheets that accompany the broadcast. I started this myself. Can't complain. The point now is that the mechanics of keeping up the work of reading the newspapers and getting books and assimilating the information is delayed because there is so much mail that follows the consequence of being on radio stations and having people write. And the old subscribers want recopies of other articles, and I'm filling envelopes every week with the sheets that accompany the tapes, the people that subscribe to the tapes. I'm filling the bibliography sheets and then getting calls and letters for requests of copies of specific articles. One type of letter send me information on the Pope and the assassination of John Paul I. How is it different than Mr. Yallop? What do you have on mind control? How many tapes do you have on John Lennon? And I have to answer these cassettes. They're all there and made, and then people order them, and the desk is just piled with mail, and it's become impossible with no secretary to keep it up. That gets to be a little difficult to understand after it's gone on for 13 years, but it's escalated so much more the work in the past few months even, that it is hard to keep up with all the requests. And there's also a serious matter that bothers me is that for all the work, if you're doing it, you're not doing it for nothing. I'm not doing it for free, because I'm investing thousands of dollars into newspaper subscriptions, into buying books, into equipment, machine, typewriter, copying machine, and so forth. There's a lot of expense put into it. There's a lot of time put into it. And I'm not really sure how many of you are using it, except for the fact that if a tape is a day late, I get phone calls from all over, where is it? And there's a lot of people that take it as a weekly thing that they have learned and gotten used to. But I don't know if you're using it in any form, and it's too expensive time-wise, energy-wise, to entertain everybody like on a treadmill, just going around and around, without a breather. If I don't even know if you are calling talk shows, does anyone know outside of you that Mae Brussell is doing the work? Do you ever alert a congressman or sent a letter to the editor. Do you call talk shows? There's Larry King, a toll-free number, or Michael Jackson. I never hear anything mentioned about this research that would turn somebody else on to it or would give them information that you have, either using my name or using your own name. When they talk about the Secretary of Labor, are you talking on the radio about it? How about the Edwin Meese confirmation coming up? We're talking about very serious things. The Fritz Kramer, the mysterious Fritz Kramer behind Henry Kissinger, as he wheels his way, probably wanting to be president someday, get the Constitution changed for him. What about DeLorean? Was my information right or wrong that DeLorean's cocaine that Mr. Hetrick had came from Bolivia, from Klaus Barbie? The mysterious money. After you hear from me on the question of the tetanus and botulism being sold mail order from Maryland, it looks like a CIA front, to Buffalo, is it dead? Your time, does it sit in a box when the tape gets there? Do you just mark it and date it, and that's it? Are you calling the stations? Do you call the Pacifica stations or BAI in New York? Or what are you doing with the information? When the Rebel article came out last year, the anniversary of Kennedy's death, people like Mark Lane and Dick Greger were in the air. I'm not aware that anyone called up and told them that there was a Rebel magazine. It's 20 years' work on John Kennedy and the Nazis. What are you doing with it? I'm not sure. I can't tell you what to do with it, but I'd like to know that if I'm doing the material, that you're using it. And if you're not using it, it wouldn't make sense to keep disseminating it out to people who do not copy it, do not alert other people or other writers about this matter. Now, I'm thinking of a number of alternatives. I've listed about 5, and I'll decide in the next 2 weeks what they're going to do, because people are mailing checks for 1985, and I don't want to cash those checks or use them, turn the tape center, because I don't know if I'm going to continue in this format. And these are the 5 alternatives. You might write to me your opinions or what you feel about it. I'm just going to throw them out in the air. One is to go off the air completely, taper off for those people that have paid up through whatever date, do the work, the tapes for them, because I'll be doing them every week anyway. I want to write them up and put them in book form. But one is to go off the air and just start writing. Do the same format, put together what are the most important stories of the week, and instead of putting out that type sheet, write a chapter a week, maybe 2 or 3 hours a day every morning, and at the end of 1985, I would have a book. I can't do it and keep the format of being in public on the air. It's just too much. So I may go off the air and write, and at the end of 1985, you'll know what I was thinking in 1984, or I may get out 4 small books during the year and make the payments for them, pay for the book, just as you pay for the subscriptions or the tapes, like Joe Jostin did many small books. He wrote Oswald, the Assassin or Fall Guy, and he has a lot of small paperback books that he got out on controversial subjects, and that would make the cost not prohibitive, and you could keep up at a regular basis on what I'm writing. I may go off the air and just start writing and do 2 books a year, 2 articles a year. I don't even have time to send outlines to publishers of material, of books ready to roll. There's no time to even sit and write this kind of thing, much less to answer all the letters. So one is to go off there completely and start writing, but the material that I'm writing on and working on, I would continue tape form to those through the time that your check has already been sent in and cashed, and the others not accept anymore. The other is to keep the weekly broadcast going on the air locally for our local listening audience. I have a good number of people up in Santa Cruz, in Salinas, Monterey Peninsula, Carmel. If everybody in the radius listened, we have a million people within the radius of the Kazoo Towers. Believe me, they don't all listen to Mae Brussell on Monday night, but there is a good, active group of people, and maybe not have any cassettes at all. Go on the air and do my 1 hour of news with them, and then do the rest of the week of writing, because I don't have to supply them with the bibliographies. They don't want it, and if they need it, they call me. My number is listed in the phone book, and in 2 minutes you can get to those sources and keep up with those local people. So, and write at the same time. So one is to go off completely, no cassettes. The other is to be on the air, but don't have cassettes, be with the local people and write books. The other is to purchase a duplicator, such as some people have them in their homes. Tom Davis of Research has a duplicator of tapes up at his place. Have a duplicator, and instead of giving them out to be made, I would copy them here. But one of the things is to keep up the format 1 hour a week, let the tapes go out, but turn it into a business whereby I start paying for some of my expenses, and you get the information and think of it as a book in those terms. I may consider that. The other is to go off the air, but make a tape once a week. Now, this is really hard to say. Some of you will be hurt. For only those people who I know are using the material. And by using it, I mean that they are providing invaluable information for me that I share with you and I would put into books myself that they pass on, but that I know they are using. That would reduce the amount of tapes down 2/3 to the listeners east, west, south, and north. There's some people who want to remain anonymous, who give me invaluable work. I couldn't do the quality of work I'm doing without them. There's some in the area who are known, people who names are up front, like Penn Jones with his newsletter, or Jonathan Marshall gets articles, translates them from Italy on the P2 and Masonic Lodge, and Ted Rubenstein and David Emery, where they're supplying material and I'm supplying back to them, where there's an exchange of information, of data. It makes sense then because I can keep up quality for writing or for the kind of research I want to do by limiting to those people. Now, some people around the country, from Texas, from Oregon, from Minneapolis, and different cities, send pockets of articles consistently, dated, marked, that I use and share with you many times. You'll see me giving credit, the Oregonian, the Washington Post, and so forth. The Houston Post, rather, the Washington Post I take. But they have pockets of envelopes that come in every week. And in order for them to keep up their quality of interest, which they obviously are very concerned about these things, I would send them tapes and limit it to other researchers who are giving back. I'm sending it to other writers and other people doing articles and setting up computer data banks. It's free. I send it all out. I spend hours with them. So this has to be a two-way street. My energy, you can't pay people for that kind of stuff. You can't buy it, and they can't pay me for what I do. It's an exchange of information between serious people who intend to use it. Now, the private listeners who take the tapes and for their own enjoyment, go to the mailbox, put on the cassette and listen. I can't say what to do, because for each one of you who I've known so well through the years, there are several hundred more of you who are writing to me, who are listening and making requests. And as I say, I can't be that public anymore, and I don't want to take on more subscribers because it really gets difficult to keep up with what I am trying to do, and trying to do it well. So these are the possibilities, those 5 possibilities. I'll think them over and share them with you. Now, back to Kazoo, we've had trouble with the station. I've never asked the subscribers to the broadcast to send the station a cent. We have our own fundraising drives, as do the Pacific Radio or Public Broadcasting. But because we had a $25,000 expense, you know what a small station has in bringing in revenue, and particularly an offbeat kind of station like this, the people that listen don't have the big bucks or foundation money. So I did request that people who get the tapes, some people who feel like it could send the station something, because to get it live on the air and then it goes forward to you, it has a different kind of energy, which is good for the station. They like it. And they also know that the tapes go out from the air to other stations. So I thought it would be a nice idea for people listening to say, we appreciate that you have Mae Brussell. There isn't any other radio station in the United States of America or in the world that has this kind of news. You can't get it any other place, and you can't back up that news with all these files and research that I've done in the 20 years. So I had hoped that some of you would write to Kazoo and to me, to give to Kazoo, to thank them for the fact that they have this unique kind of broadcasting, and that you appreciate it. Even though you're not listening range of the station, you appreciate it. Well, I put that out 2 weeks ago. In response to that letter, I didn't get a single letter, not one, to show this station. I didn't tell them I was going to ask for it. They didn't ask me to do it. But it would be nice if 200 people had $2 and I walked in, with $400 and said, here, these are people that appreciate this hour. See, 1 hour airtime there is very valuable. It's valuable to anybody, and most of the people work as volunteers, and the rent is very high. So I put that out, and there wasn't a single response. And I don't feel it's your responsibility to support the station. But on the other hand, when you have the freedom to say what you want in this country, and you have the way to get it out, freedom is expensive, and it's not going to be around too long. And you have every opportunity to use it or to spend it on something else. And that's why I threw it out to you, and you can do what you want. And so we'll play around with those ideas. Now I'll get on to the news, and I'll let you know within, as I say, 2 weeks what my decision is. Last week I was sharing the material about the Nazis up in Idaho, that lovely little gang with one group that was nurtured from the California prison system, the Aryan Brotherhood, and the other fellow up there, the great pastor from Lockheed, who for 12 years has been running his hate factory. That's one is Richard Butler, the Jesus Christ Christian Aryan Nations up in Idaho, the Lockheed fellow who entertains the Grand Dragon, the Grand Wizards, the Nazis, the Posse Comitatus. And the other is Keith Gilbert, who is 15 miles away from him, who organized his church, splintered off from Butler's, but organized his church with a nucleus of the Aryan Brotherhood coming out of the prison system. The San Francisco Chronicle had a long story about this, and the reason they wrote it up is that they have linked and gotten the weapon of one of the fellows of this team, this Gary Lee Yarborough, who shot and killed Alan Berg in Denver, Colorado. He's the controversial newsman who talked about the Nazis and talked about the Klan and happened to be Jewish. And he was gunned down, lots of bullets in his body, and they went away and left him. And now the new murder of one of the great heroes of the Christian right, Mr. Matthews, was killed last week, and now his co-partner has been charged with killing the radio announcer in Denver, Colorado. The headquarters are in Idaho. They're close near Montana on the Idaho border. The actual location is strategic because where they are in Idaho, they border around 6 states and then Canada in the northern area. So it's sort of like Colonia Dignidad between Chile and Argentina. You can go either way if the federales come after you. This Robert Matthews died, and they're having a big ceremony. I guess it'll be over this week because he became one of the martyrs or heroes, fighting and shooting an FBI agent and dying for the cause of the Nazis. These fellows so far are linked. I mentioned before the $3.6 million Brinks robbery in Ukiah, $25,000 from a bank in 1983 that Matthews did alone, $500,000 from a shopping center in a shopping mall in Seattle in April, and shooting a federal agent, and now the murder of Alan Berg, and goodness knows how many other will find that they murdered because maybe they'll stop and settle for Berg, but I'm sure on the way up that they've murdered more, and they say they intend to have a lot more killings. Now, Matthews and others were very much part of Richard Butler's group, but according to the San Francisco Chronicle, they began to get more violent, and they began to splinter off because he's too calm. He's just Mr. Nice Guy, and they don't want such a nice guy. They're tired, according to the newspaper, of Butler's soft approach. Now, the difference in the escalation of the strong approach has to do directly with what I charged Ronald Reagan of doing, of praising the Minutemen, praising the Klan, the Nazis and the Klan, the very fellows that have this intentional world Nazism and racism to get rid of the black race, and calling them freedom fighters, identifying them and letting them have press conferences appreciating what he said, and now arming and recognizing people like Mr. Dobasan, Roberto Dobasan in El Salvador, who's brought into Washington to get special honors from 12 conservative groups, not one or two, but 12. We have sent our special forces, our soldiers of fortune, our Green Berets. They've been allowed to teach how to kill, how to gouge the eyes, and the torture. And now these people have gotten the message from Ronald Reagan, Alexander Haig with the Red Dawn and these various movies, that anybody who doesn't like a commie is a freedom fighter, and it's open sesame now. So this is one more stage of escalation into the domestic scene that has been nurturing around this country Since the 1960s, just before the Kennedy murder, after Kennedy was nominated to run against Richard Nixon, these people began smoldering in little pockets and getting more muscle with very little or no prosecution while we talk about terrorists in Kuwait and Lebanon and Iran. The story says they are tired of the soft approach of Butler. They want more action. They're militants. They want to overthrow the United States government. They want a racial revolution, and they want what they call actions. They have activities planned. And I ask you, question mark, does that include the botulism or the tetanus that I visualize going from Maryland to Buffalo down through Vancouver and down to the Northwest? I could just about see the route when I first read the story. They meet every year at Richard Butler's house, but furthermore, and I mentioned their meeting last year, furthermore, they have an international World Aryan Congress, and I wonder how close this goes to John Singlaub and the World Anti-Communist League and the fellows down in Central America and South America and Asia, an international World Aryan Conference, and they have a mailing list of 6,000 people. They are talking now blowing up bridges, disrupting utility companies, the gas, water, electricity, and phone, and a policeman from Denver, Colorado, investigating the Byrd case, the murder there, was talking about Yarborough, and this is his quotation: "You are dealing with people who have an Armageddon-type mentality. There isn't a Shiite Muslim terrorist in the world that is any worse at generating hate than these guys." Now, you might, as a social activist, take this quotation from the sheet that goes here or the sheet that accompanies the tape and write to George Shultz and write to Jeremiah Denton. He's in charge of the terrorism of the Senate and those terrible committees that keep blaming the leftists and Gaddafi. You might write to some public officials and say, what in the hell is going on? Or the Justice Department. You may think that you're not making a dent, but if enough of you do it and keep a record and carbon copy of your letter, you may ask, as long as Shultz wants a pre-attack before violence, why doesn't the CIA and the Defense Department go in and wipe these people out? They have the weapons, they have the intent, and he's talking about to preserve the possibility of violence. They have their stated intentions and links to the intelligence community. Why not test George Shultz's theory out in the United States of America instead of on native populations around the world? Now, they mix their elements. The paper says the Klan, the Nazis, and the Aryan Brotherhood gangs out of the prison with, I mentioned last week, Richard Butler from Lockheed Aeronautical. Very important connection, the Lockheed connections. And Richard Butler was also, this is the fellow up north in charge of the International World Aryan Congress. Richard Butler served as National Director of the Christian Defense League in Lancaster, California. I mentioned last week on the broadcast that he worked with Dr. Wesley Smith of Lancaster. Smith was his mentor and died in 1971, and they moved the church up to Idaho. But I didn't know until this week that Butler was the national director. He wasn't just a little out in Palms, California, Lancaster. National is through 50 states, director of the Christian Defense League. Now, in November of 1983, when I wrote the article on the Nazis and the murder of John Kennedy, I had a section on the 1960 elections and the role of the Nazi and the fascists in that group. And this is what I wrote. Briefly, in case you don't remember it, and if you haven't read it, I said before the election of 1960, a group within the Christian right plotted to kill John Kennedy and Van Nuys. That was from Bill Turner's book, The Danger on the Right. In Van Nuys, California, while Kennedy was still a candidate. The group was a melt of the anti-Castro Cubans, the Minutemen, and the homegrown Nazis. And the Minutemen surfaced again, during Watergate in 1972 in San Diego, very much the activists, the homegrown Nazis. Some of these were sought by Jim Garrison following his arrest of Clay Shaw for testimony before the New Orleans grand jury. The important thing is that these people, such as Lauren Hall and William Seymour, and that gang of anti-Castro Cubans worked with the Nazis, and Clay Shaw, who was tangled with these people, was in the OSS with Wild Bill Donovan and Mr. Bloomfield and the organization known as Permindex, which has national international links to assassination teams in Operation Condor, originally in Mexico and then down at Colonia Dignidad. Clay Shaw worked with those very people. This Christian Defense League that is up north now, that is just getting a peak of the 1984 Christian Defense League, but it nurtured in 1960 and should have been nipped in the bud in 1960 with the plans that killed John Kennedy at that point. And then I went on, the leader of one of the groups of the Christian Defense League, one of them, and Richard Butler, as I say, is national director of the group. What the leader of the group was Reverend William P. Gale. Gale was in the Army in the Philippines training guerrilla bands. His superior was Charles Willoughby. By the late 1950s, Gale came home to recruit veterans of the war for his identity group, that strong Christian group, which was financed by a wealthy Los Angeles businessman, and we still don't know who that man is. And one of the Christian Defense League's contacts, and again, this Richard Butler of the Nazi group up north, was the national director of the Christian Defense League. His contact was Captain Robert K. Brown, who publishes Soldier of Fortune, who publishes the books on the silencers and on silencers used for assassinations, a book how Mitchell Wirbel made these special weapons for the CIA, the Bay of Pigs, for assault squads, and so forth. It was Mitchell Wirbel who, at the time this article was being written, moved into the house of poor Larry Flint, and when Larry Flint was becoming almost a vegetable, Mitchell Wirbel and G. Gordon Liddy and Timothy Leary and Gordon Novell moved into his house. And I was writing about Wirbel at the time. But Robert Brown is important because of his direct contact to John Singlaub of the World Anti-Communist League with the known Nazis and fascists they work with Singlaub's briefings in the current time in our Defense Department, with their links to the death squad, the 30,000 killed in Argentina, links to the 50,000 killed in El Salvador. And I've mentioned, I'll take a 1-minute break now and go back, part 2 of this broadcast, of the Nazis and the Nazi fortress up in Idaho with their international connections, and now the computer to link the Nazis throughout the country. This is Mae Brussell. It's broadcast number 680. It's side 2 of 680, December the 17th, 1984. The weeks go so quickly, I didn't even take time to say Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, because people get these tapes later and a different time period. The holidays have come and gone. And, of course, soon we have the New Year's, so by the time this gets to you, it'll just be about New Year's Eve. So, of course, I wish you a very healthy and happy New Year, and thank you for all of the things that many of you have done. I'm sorry there's so many of you now. It makes it more complicated, but I do appreciate the contact. I can't reciprocate by answering everything, but I appreciate the contacts and the information, and I hope you have a good year, and I hope the new project that I take on will be successful and that too many people won't be unhappy by whatever decision I make. Now, continuing with this article in the San Francisco Chronicle on the Nazis and the dangerous group called The Chilling Look Inside the Neo-Nazi Fortress. These people have strong links. As I say, Mr. Butler was the national director of the Christian Defense League, and you can take what I've written and what I've said on the air and go from there on the many broadcasts of the seriousness of it. Now, 4 years ago, Mr. Keith Gilbert split with Richard Butler. We shared that information. Gilbert works with San Quentin convicts and with various Aryan brotherhoods that came out of the prison system. He's 15 miles from Gilbert and Butler, 15 miles from each other, and their churches have the same idea. White racists, do away with the Jews, do away with the blacks, do away with the liberals, and let's get the dynamite going. And the Aryan soldiers there work with stacks of dynamite. They shoot cannons. Large artillery pieces are heard by neighbors around. And Mr. Gilbert boasts that he has stockpiles of weapons, that they are held by white supremacists, and they even have World War II tanks. Now, Mr. Gilbert has put in a computer center to reach Nazis around the country, but they have international Nazi meetings every year. So it goes beyond, the computer may be national, but the membership is international, and now they're linked by computers. So if they don't like a certain radio program, or they don't like a certain person or a certain writer or a certain Jew, they can wipe them out, get rid of them. And I believe that they've been doing this for a long time, and I often refer to the death squads in the United States, but now they're getting more organized. And this article says the aim of the Nazis, in particular, that they talk about every year at their international meeting, is to have unlimited arms supplies, to join themselves by computers, to seize control of large chunks of Idaho, Washington, Montana, and Canada, to purify the nation of racial filth, and if the government forces to try and retake the area, they will have an impossible task. Now, having the botulism or the tetanus and this kind of bacterial warfare that they may be very well sprouting and pulling as their trump card, it would be very difficult without a lot of pain to this country to know how far they go or if they're going to erupt in other cities simultaneously, because I believe, with being very modest, that they have hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't think that 3.5 million up at Eureka, that bank robbery, was anything. I mean, it makes it look like they need money. There was a receipt here for one of the fellows that just bought a $12,000 car. With money coming in from South America and Argentina and from around the world, from Taiwan and the Philippines and so forth, there has been an intent to take this country in better way than their suicidal idea to attack the Pentagon with suicide teams and the government. By attacking the Pentagon, you slow up the military so they can't respond to what you're doing, and you have chaos. Now, they have a book that is their guideline. I'll have to get a copy of it. I just read about it this week, called Turner's Diaries by William Pierce. And this reminds me of the book The Black Abductor, with the exact story of the kidnapping of Patty Hearst, the Donald DeFreeze, the publisher's daughter. It was down to a finite point what was going to happen to Patty Hearst 2 years later by a person we've never heard of. The name was printed by a printer we've never heard of that obviously was a CIA front for getting out a script so those who read it would know the goals and techniques. And so the Turner's Diary seems to be the book for them. So at their international meeting, somebody has put this out to understand what they're going to do. They're going to start a white guerrilla group to launch a terrorist revolution. It's going to end up in Israel. They're going to destroy Israel with atomic bombs, and one of the heroes will die in a suicide attack against the Pentagon. Now, this mentality feeds with the idea of the Armageddon in Israel. Only these fellows link up to those people who are planning an Armageddon. Remember what we shared last week and the week before, the P2 Lodge, the Masonic Lodge, formed by the OSS and the CIA, and I have to go into more of that detail for you, more information on how we put Mr. Licio Gelli back in business in an organization that Mussolini blacklisted because he said it was a government inside of a government. And when the Allies take Italy, they reconstruct and join these two lodges for Licio Gelli and Mr. Borghese and the Black Princes of Murder and Assassination and Terror and International Death Squads. It took our own intelligence community to put together for those fascist Nazis what Mussolini wouldn't allow and didn't trust. And is that what we fought the war? We, in quotes, won the war to put into a power, a secret organization that was outlawed under Mussolini. Maybe that's why they wanted Mussolini dead and hung up by the heels with his mistress, because they took over his networks and could do more without him. Maybe they thought Mussolini was too nice. But the textbook is Turner's Diaries. And after Mr. Matthews was killed and Mr. Yarborough was shot, he was shot, there's a shootout, they went into the home of Mr. Yarborough and found the gun that is linked to the shooting of the radio announcer in Denver, Colorado. Now, the article in the Chronicle says a few months ago, the fiery rhetoric like this would be disregarded. Why would it be disregarded? I have to write to the person who wrote this in the Chronicle. A few months ago, they disregarded this. I've been talking about this on the air for many, many years. It's like J. Edgar Hoover saying in 1968 to 1970 there was no organized crime in this country. He was sitting down and munching with Mo Dallas and Lucky Luciano or Meyer Lansky and the Joe Bananas and using them as agents and saying there's no organized crime. Well, the same way these people say a few months ago it would be disregarded, they say now the FBI has linked Matthews and 7 others to 3 robberies that netted about $4 million. And there's a list of their various feats and the places they broke into, the banks, and the death threats to the driver of the Brinks truck. And Matthews, of course, the one who's now dead, left a letter when he died saying that his group, the Order, that he organized would continue, that there's enemies in these countries such as the liberals and so forth. And he left sort of a last letter in case he was killed, I guess, on his intents on taking over the country. Matthews' group, taken again out of the Turner's Diaries by William Pierce, has, it's not the New Order, the Order that ties into the other fellows, but he had his own special little meaner group, as you would say, and to fund this with crimes, robbery, counterfeiting. Counterfeiting would be a source of money to continue the operations, and also was a purpose to undermine the U.S. economy. They call these neo-Nazis, but that was the goal of Adolf Hitler during the war and after the war. Whether you believe he's alive or dead, and I happen to believe he probably lived, and Martin Bormann, the whole gang, it was to take America by counterfeiting in Great Britain and the economy in Europe, taking America and these countries and putting out phony money and getting the books off balance in that way, but using some of the money and then confusing the other money. And the Order would buy guns and have terrorist attacks, and their goal was assassinations. And the enemies are the Jews, the minorities, the political liberals, and destroy the Jewish press once and for all. They call the major news media the Jewish news media. And in all fairness, I think the press deserves to be destroyed. I can't do it, but it is not an accurate press. I shouldn't even agree with them on any point. But in a way, the news media deserves some of the anger that is directed towards them. And eventually, people like Reverend Moon, who forms his own press combine, and Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson and all the Christian network will have their own reporters, their own newscasts. So when they wipe out the others, you'll get Christian broadcasting from coast to coast that will replace what they think is liberal and I think is a bunch of mush that if it were wiped out tomorrow and you just read books, you'd be better off. The Monterey Herald has another small story on the neo-Nazis tied up north. I don't know how much your local papers are getting it. They describe them as a small group bent on a revolution, a violent revolution. A small group. They meet nationally, internationally, have links to all the intelligence outlets, and this article describes their crimes across the West and their murder of the Jewish talk show, the host in Denver, but the counterfeiting, the illegal weapons, and so forth. And 7 people were arrested at the house where Mr. Matthews died, several houses away. And there's a list of some of the weapons they had in the house. In addition, there's much, much more up at the location where the original priest, the Lockheed priest, and the Aryan Brotherhood priest have their churches. But in the area where Mr. Yarborough was arrested, the cohort with Matthews, in one home they found automatic weapons, explosives, $73,000 in cash, receipt for $11,000 automobile that had just been paid, 6,000 rounds of ammunition, 1,000 sticks of dynamite, plastic explosives, hand grenades, semi-automatic rifles, infrared vision telescopes, slings loaded with .308 caliber military ammunition, heavy assault rifles. They had 4 loaded crossbows, 1.5 pounds of high-power explosive, 110 blasting caps, guns, silencers, guns, lots of them, police scanners, booby traps. That's just a little bit from one home, the home of Mr. Yarborough, who's now in custody, who was arrested. But they've been stockpiling for 12 years. That's all he had with him at that time. So I can't even visualize what they really have because, as I say, George Shultz, he wants a preemptive strike. Let him go up there. That's the best place. Schultzy, go on up there. Forget Lebanon and Kuwait and Iran. Go on up and take them the excuse of the preemptive strike against terrorism is to save something or lives will happen in the future. Now, save those bridges. What's a Bixby Creek down here, the bridge to Big Sur? You cut off the whole Highway 1 right in the middle. Important bridges around the country, utilities cut off. Go on in, Schultz, and attack our domestic terrorists. Never did you have a better chance, and I hope some of you write to him about it. Now, getting on to another book and matters which are important to that and not separate from it, but into the Licio Jelly, the OSS, the assassination teams along the lines that I've been doing the last 2 weeks. A subscriber to the tapes, several of them, sent me just a few pages from a book, a new book out called The Year of Armageddon by Gordon Thomas and Max Morgan. It just came out a few months ago from London, Grenada Publishers. I'm sure that Tom Davis Research will have it soon, and you can write and get it from him. I'm going to quote from the book and then intersperse certain ideas that are pertinent because this is a very important section on the use of the Knights of Malta and the Opus Dei for spying, the Vatican network of spies, and the use of them for political purposes, and how the use was put together by Wild Bill Donovan, who's so important to Permindex, to the assassination teams, because particularly I'm interested in the murder of John Kennedy and the effects it had on the country later, and the links of these people grounded into that particular event. This book goes, I'll give you the quotes, and then when I get off the track, I'll explain when and get back to direct quotes. It says the American agency, the CIA, of course, is not the only one to work inside the Vatican. The Soviets, the British, the French have moles in the walls. The BND, the Galen Group, the Mossad, and Israel have at least one pipeline into the Secretariat of State. For centuries, the Vatican was the prime target of secular intelligence. Today is one of the world's richest repositories of genuine secrets, acting as a magnet for spies. There is a network in the Vatican and outside of it of over 100 nuncios, pronuncios, and apostolic delegates who send into the Secretariat of State, into the Vatican, news of a spying nature. Now, when John, just getting off from that direct quote of a possible spy within the Vatican, when John DeLorean was first arrested and taken by surprise, there was an article in the newspaper that he attended St. Patrick's every day in New York, and he was with Cardinal Cook, and Cook died shortly after the DeLorean arrest of a very quick cancer that he was supposed to have had for a long period of years and was functioning perfectly well until that time. Now, a subscriber to the tape sent me an article from Contemporary Christian Magazine, October 1984, about DeLorean. It said for 8 or 10 years prior to his arrest, he went to the church every single morning of his life, usually St. Patrick's if I was in New York or St. James if I was in London. Every morning, 7 to 7:15. The minute he was arrested, he disassociated himself. He carried a Bible. I never saw a picture of a priest with him. He became more like a fundamentalist Christian. His background were parents from Alsace and from Vienna. He worked for General Motors. His dad, I believe, worked for Ford, both big suppliers and funders of equipment for Adolf Hitler during the entire war. DeLorean had his mysterious auto plant in Ireland, immense millions of dollars of subsidies from the British government, a company based in Panama with unaccounted millions and millions in Switzerland. And he is a perfect kind of a carrier, could be, but not necessarily, frequently everyday civilians going in and out of the Vatican because of his huge corporate connections and multinational corporation connections, and is a possibility that William Hetrick was, in fact, obtaining and dealing with Klaus Barbie down in South America. And Klaus Barbie got his ticket to South America by the Knights of Malta and the Vatican when he left Europe to set up headquarters in South America. The book goes on. It is the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, that dominates the intelligence knowledge inside the Vatican. From that day, almost 40 years ago, this would be 1944, when one of the founder members of the CIA, General William Wild Bill Donovan, received an audience by Pope Pius XII and decorated with the Grand Cross of the Order of St. Sylvester, the oldest and most prestigious of papal knighthoods, an award given to only 100 other men in history who, by feats of arms, by arms or writing or outstanding deeds have spread the faith of Catholicism and have safeguarded and championed their church, Catholicism. From the day Donovan bowed his head before Pius XII, the CIA remained ensconced, virtually without interruption, as the prime intelligence advisor to successive pontiffs. And the footnote they have here is Martin Lee, a respected American writer specializing in CIA matters, who told us in Rome in October '83 that Donovan received his knighthood for assisting the church during World War II in his capacity as chief officer of the OSS. Was Donovan helping America or the church, the OSS, and working with the Vatican? And they described it as the forerunner, he describes it, of the CIA. Donovan's close ties with the Vatican gave him an invaluable insight into secret affairs of the Vatican, then supposedly a neutral enclave in the midst of fascist Rome. And they give a credit for Mother Jones' article of July of '83. Now, going back to the Rebel article on the Nazis and the JFK assassination and the roots of the Nazis in the intelligence system that I wrote for Rebel in 1983 in November, I have a section on Wild Bill Donovan of the OSS and Allen Dulles and the Vatican. This is not new for you now, but it comes out in this new book, The Armageddon, the Year of Armageddon, and I want to repeat this to you because I think there are a lot of people that have the article that haven't read it, and maybe we should have a storybook hour and I read it to you out loud. But in the section on Donovan, I tell about his pudding. He was in charge of Allen Dulles' offices in Bern, Switzerland from 1940 on, how Dulles was working with SS Commander Karl Wolff, who simultaneously was running Treblinka concentration camp and cooking off 300,000 Jews while he's sitting with Dulles and Donovan is to be knighted for working with SS Karl Wolff, who appears again still alive at that time on a yacht that belonged to Mr. Goering. And Wolff is making deals with the OSS with William Donovan, and the sovereign state in the Vatican, Wild Bill Donovan, was top dog of the OSS. And I wrote, shortly before the Germans overran Europe, and this is the favor Donovan did that got him the knighthood, he put Father Felix Morleon, a papal functionary, who set up at Pro Dio, that organization with God in Lisbon. He moved him to New York City on 60th Street at the apartment address of William Taub, a front during the war, the American Council for International Promotion of Democracy. Taub wrote a book about the relationship he had with Cardinal Alfredo Ottaviani, Ottaviania, of the Holy See, and Taub's friend, this cardinal, arranged in 1929 that Vatican would remain neutral, that Mussolini would give them $89 million in 1929 to stay neutral as Franco emerged and Hitler emerged and Mussolini emerged. So this book, the article by Martin Lee, says that they did favors. He gave an invaluable insight into the Vatican, and they worked in the enclave. They did a lot more, and this is terribly important, that donation of $89 million. Now, the person closest to that was William Taub, and then that money went into the hands, as I wrote, of Michael Sindona, and they began mingling it with the GOP, with Richard Nixon and Licio Gelli, with Ronald Reagan, and other top officials. And then it turns out that our CIA is getting together the P2 Masonic Lodge to overthrow Italy and the United States involved with the Kennedy assassination. The main people in that had a link to the murder of our President of the United States. And as I wrote, this is a year ago, when Rome was liberated in 1944, Morleon and Pro Dio relocated there the organization, and in recognition of Donovan's good work on behalf of Pro Dio, the Pope knighted him with the Grand Cross of the Order of St. Sylvester, where he flew off to Washington to cut his deal with the CIA. Reinhard Gehlen got his knighthood, the Military Order of Malta from the Pontiff, and so did James Jesus Angleton, a Donovan operative in Rome, who became the CIA's chief of counterintelligence. This is very important because of the role that they play later with Mr. Donovan, but the Knights of Malta is expressed in this book as being terribly important to repressive governments and used as a spy agency at the same time. Incidentally, just not to get too far off the subject, but this same Taub that housed Morleon in Washington, D.C., and it was a close friend of Ottaviani's in Italy, was left at the time of Watergate in the Swiss Alps for dead. I mentioned that on broadcast, and that a man named Ernest Kaiser had hired killers to kill Taub, but he miraculously survived, and I'd written an article believing that he was among those 30 top Watergate people that was killed at the time of Watergate, but that was with a question mark of Kaiser. And he surfaced later, and Taub rather, had blamed Kaiser, and Kaiser was apprehended for the murder attempt of Taub. Kaiser's name surfaced one more time in the book on Edwin Wilson. He's the man who accompanied Edwin Wilson home through the Dominican Republic to New York City, where Wilson was arrested in June of '82. Kaiser accompanied him there. Recently, Kaiser's name surfaced one more time as a CIA operative. He's involved with a banking scandal that was being investigated in Florida that links to the chief investigator, Mr. Williams, of the Air Florida flight that I said was sabotage. I'll give you the dates and the information. Kaiser's name appears in the Swiss Alps trying to kill Taub with those close links to the Vatican, with his bringing in Edwin Wilson, who has direct links through Nugenhan and through the Masonic Lodge and the P2 to the new Rossano Brossi evidence that I'm going to go into. Kaiser's name surfaces with the Air Florida scandal, the banking scandal in Florida. And just last week, Ernest Kaiser, was shot in Maryland near Washington with a satchel full of documents on Robert Vesco. He wasn't killed. He was shot in the arm, and somebody took the documents, his involvement of the Vesco affair. So that Taub was important, Kaiser's important, and the Vatican is the common denominator. The Vatican arms, the drug smuggling, the P2, the CIA, and the OSS all come together, and the year of the Armageddon touches on the importance of some of these agencies, and particularly Mr. William Donovan, and he set the network for these spies that could do their dirty work later. The book goes on regarding the current connections of the CIA with the Pope and the Vatican. The CIA gives John Paul II a weekly briefing. The CIA is as close as the closest phone call. Mr. Casey has had a long, advanced, standing, intimate relationship with the papacy. He also is a Knight of Malta. Casey, more than any other CIA director since Mr. Donovan's time, has systematically developed the CIA ties with the Vatican. The CIA retains its position as John Paul's main guide through the world of secret intelligence. They keep him continuously informed on Central America. They provide him with accurate evidence of the spread of liberation theology. That means the priests who feel sorry for the oppressed down there. They tip and squeal off information to the Vatican on the latest behavior of left-wing clerics in Nicaragua and El Salvador. John Paul II receives information from his cardinals, his bishops, his nuncios, but he has the CIA behind him all the way. Casey is a member of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. The Vatican, it goes on, this article to say, it goes back to the Crusades, the warriors for the Vatican to protect the arm of the Catholic Church. And again, it brings up the question of who do these public officials, such as Vernon Walder and Alexander Haig and the Buckleys and Claire Luce and Patrick Frawley and Jeremiah Denton, J. Peter Grace, who do they represent? They are the active running members. William Simon, Robert Wagner, the former mayor of New York. Who do these people represent? And this one chapter on the importance of Casey and the Vatican says, today, the order of the Knights of Malta, with its nation status, is important in the way it informs the Vatican, and it also was important, in a footnote it says here, of helping the Nazis leave the country after World War II, leave the various countries, and through the order of the Knights of Malta, they helped with the International Red Cross that 50,000 Nazi war criminals, including Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyons, got out of Europe by way of the Vatican and by way of the priests, with the help of Reinhard Gehlen, who also, as I said, was knighted. Hitler's big spy master, and then joined the CIA. So one of the footnotes of this book, The Year of Armageddon, tells the order of the Knights of Malta, and of course, Licio Gelli was active with the Rat Line. 50,000 wanted war criminals left and went out of this country to plant their little seeds or acorns, and now you'll see more of it in the United States coming out in the type of activity that those Nazis up in Idaho have. The article says a large portion of the Knights of Malta, there's 10,000 families, are part of Europe's oldest and richest Catholics. They, of course, ban the Jews, the Protestants, the Muslims, the separated or divorces. There's knighthood. Much of it is secret, and some of the members of the Knights of Malta, you don't know who they are. Now, it goes on that we have a CIA station chief in Rome who happens to be Mr. Wilson, who's also a Knight of Malta, and it's an ideal cover for William Casey. That the CIA can't go in and out of the Vatican every day, but Mr. Wilson can, and the Knights of Malta have to go to Rome once a year to see the Pope, and on their various travels back and forth, and you read many of them going in and out of Europe and in and out of the Vatican, they are a source of information for John Paul II about what's going on in South America. They also tip him off about what's going on in other countries too, but this book says both the CIA and Vatican know that it is essential for the Pope never to be seen openly or aligning himself with the political aims of the CIA or the Reagan administration. Working through an order, such as the Knights of Malta, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, the country's leading Catholics, and the CIA appear to have a wider distance away from the Pope than its Rome station could achieve. The CIA in Rome can brief the Pope once a week. The CIA would appear unacceptable if the station chief was in and out of the Pope's office every day. Using the order, the Knights of Malta, Casey has opened a sophisticated conduit which allows the CIA on an indirect and informal basis to exchange ideas and opinions with the Pope. The CIA director, John McCone, used to fly to Rome and then struggled to persuade the John the 23rd to accept the CIA line. They use in this chapter the word to persuade John on the CIA line. John wasn't persuaded easily, and I did one or several broadcasts on what I believed was the murder of John the 23rd in June of 1963, leading up to the murder of John Kennedy in November 1963, and the CIA murder of Patrice Lumumba in 1961. The triumvirate of people that were beginning to get along and coexist with each other, who were a threat to the multinationals in the Congo, and I'll do some more of it later. So I don't have time to finish even reviewing the few pages of this book, The Year of the Armageddon, but I'm going to continue this with you next week and then go into Mr. Donovan of the OSS and some more important information about how his network was formed together and how it becomes the tremendous operation of Permindex, the role, again, in killing Kennedy, some new information that was just put together. So I'll have to take a break for one more week and get back to The Year of the Armageddon by Gordon Thomas and Max Borgen. And in the meantime, I'll be talking to some of you or corresponding on decisions to make. It's a shame to make them over the holidays. I may not rush into them, but there will be changes in the format of the broadcast as soon as I can make that transition easily. In the meantime, this is Mae Brussell, and I'll be back with you next week. Take care of yourself and have some good holidays, and we'll keep collecting that news.